Good evening, everyone. And I want to welcome you to our virtual discussion of the powerful and evocative documentary, Overdosed, the real story behind America's opioid epidemic. My name is Jody Brummage, and I am the Director for Education and Outreach at the Robert C. Byrd Center for Congressional History and Education in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And I want to thank each of you for joining us tonight for this discussion. I first want to express our profound gratitude to the sponsor for this evening's event, West Virginia University Medicine, whose gracious gift has made this virtual screening a possibility. I also want to recognize our partner organizations this evening, the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County, and GRaCE, which stands for Greater Recovery and Community Empowerment. We'll learn a little bit more about GRaCE coming up later in this evening's discussion. Additional support came from the American Conservation Film Festival, and we encourage you to visit their website, conservationfilmfest.org, to view the schedule for their upcoming virtual festival, March 24th through 28th. The Byrd Center strives to provide quality public programming free of charge to the Shepherdstown community and Shepherd University campus. We cannot do this without the support of the Friends of the Byrd Center, whose investment through giving to our educational and program initiatives makes our mission of advancing representative democracy a reality. I encourage you to visit www.byrdcenter.org/support us and learn about an exciting matching opportunity that is currently going on, which will double the impact of all gifts made to the support of the Byrd Center. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to thank our planning committee who made tonight's event possible. Effie Callis, Senator John Unger, Marti Steiner, and Marianne Alexander. Overdosed highlights the troubling turmoil of a deadly American opioid crisis as it unfolds in the small town of Petersburg in rural West Virginia, the state hardest hit by this epidemic. Through interviews with former drug dealers, overprescribing doctors, DEA agents, and local community members, Mary Sue Connolly uncovers a shocking narrative of the pharmaceutical industry's intentional plan to target opioid sales to an impoverished, underserved community and the resulting addiction, prison, and overdose cycles of its citizens. Overdosed provides viewers access to the corporate, profit-driven dark side of this crisis, while revealing the core humanity of its survivors. The documentary exposes key elements about the rapid progress of this deadly epidemic and the ways communities are now coping with its destruction. When the opioid epidemic impacted the filmmaker's own family, director-producer Mary Sue Connolly put her career in television on hiatus to devote all of her resources to the Overdosed project. Overdosed will wake you up to the tragedy of a small town ravaged by the epidemic and inspire you to get involved in finding solutions. Mary Sue Connolly is an Irish-born filmmaker and video editor who worked as the editor-producer for CNN's New York bureau and as an editor at CBS Television Distributing. During her time at CBS, Mary Sue edited numerous award-winning investigative reports, including the Exceptional Merit in Media Awards, the National Headliner Award, the Clarion Award, and the National Press Club Award. And Mary Sue has very graciously opened access to us to be able to view this film in advance of tonight's discussion, and we certainly appreciate that. So before I turn things over to Mary Sue to get her initial remarks on the documentary, I want to encourage everyone again to make sure that your video is turned off, that your microphone is muted, and to please utilize the chat box to submit your questions. After we hear from Mary Sue and after we hear a little bit about GRaCE's work, I will then direct your questions to our speakers at that point. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Mary Sue Connolly, producer director of Overdosed.
Thank you, Jody, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. It was always my mission just to share it with the community and to get as many people engaged in this topic as possible. So I'm glad you're all here, and thank you so much for all the hosts allowing me this platform. So yeah, I started this film 4 years ago. So it's been a long journey. Documentaries take a long time. I mean, I would say that I was finished a year ago, but then I still tweak, in the editing room. Within the last year, I've still been going back and updating things because so much has happened since I started this film. We've seen an awful lot of change, thank goodness. So, but there's still a long way to go. This setback that we've had lately with COVID obviously has held things up and hampered a lot of outreach in the recovery movement, but hopefully we'll be able to reach people that need to be reached. And my real mission, honestly, when I started this project was I felt like I didn't know what was happening in West Virginia, and I didn't know the impact of this epidemic, until it actually came to my own door. And I don't know, I didn't know. I mean, I feel like maybe I should have read more, done more research on this topic. But the reason I made this film is because everybody needs to know, what happens in this community and in communities across the United States, but especially West Virginia. And I don't want anybody to be like me sitting in New York or California, wherever you are, and not know what's happening in this part of the world. Because, that was the point of making the film, to let everybody know this great injustice that was happening. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mary Sue. So I would like to know what led you to Petersburg? What brought you to these communities? What first opened your eyes to what was going on?
Yeah, as I said, I was directly impacted because my nephew, who I was very close to, he was 21 when he overdosed, and he went to WVU, and he lived in Morgantown. And it was the greatest shock of my life when I got the phone call telling me that Paulie wasn't with us anymore. So that was kind of, just the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another chapter. And this chapter, I feel like devoting my resources, to helping people and other families who might, and exposing, as I said, this injustice. I feel like it was an injustice. I feel like my nephew Paul should be here with us today, and I think it's a tragedy that he's not, and that there's so many people like me that have suffered directly from this epidemic. And so that was, Paulie passed away on November the 24th, 2016, which is a little more than 4 years ago. And when I went down to Morgantown to set up, we had to set up the funeral and everything down there. I started to, that's when I really was awakened to the extent of this epidemic. I was in shock, I was suffering, I was grieving, but I also quickly became very angry when I started to realize that I was not alone, and that every single person I met in West Virginia had a story like me. And then I quickly began to realize that this is like a world war. This is ground zero. This is catastrophic, and how did I not know this? And as I said, that was my inspiration for trying to reach out and tell the world what was happening. So that's what, so when I was in Morgantown and I started to do research, and I read some great journalists, Eric Eyre, for example, in Charleston, who exposed a piece about the extent of the pills that were shipped to West Virginia. He won a Pulitzer for that story. So when I started to do more research and realized that it really wasn't an accidental occurrence in this part of the world, I just started to investigate and read everything I could on this matter. And I got involved in some on Facebook groups with people who were also suffering loss, and I was desperately just asking questions, trying to find out other people's stories, trying to come to terms with my own grief. And I met a girl called Bree in one of these Facebook groups, and she sent me videos that she was making, because she was very active about she was angry herself about everything that was happening in her state. So, when I heard her history, I was like, wow, you've been to federal prison, you were a drug dealer, you're a young girl, you're trying to get this word out, would you, could I interview you for my documentary? I really feel like I have to tell a story about this. The reason I couldn't tell the story in Morgantown, which is where I lost Polly, was because people were very reluctant to talk about it in Morgantown. There was a lot of drugs in the community, and there was a lot of drug dealers coming to town, and people were actually scared and very reluctant to go on camera and to say anything about this epidemic, or about how they were involved with it, or if somebody knew their background, or they didn't want to let the world know that they either had an addiction or they were involved, or they knew much about this. So when I met Bree, it was kind of revelatory because she was really, really ready to talk about her story. So she was ready to go on camera. She was up for anything. And I went to meet her. I drove across the mountains. I'm not sure if I was coming from Morgantown or Elkins at the time, but it was snowing and it was icy. And I took that road through the mountains to meet Bree at night. And I was just struck by her willingness to talk about this issue. And I was struck by the contrast of this beautiful young woman who was so open and friendly and nice, but had this very, very, very dark story. So I found the contrast between what she would say and how she looked to be really interesting. I felt like it wasn't your typical drug dealer. And I found that interesting, and I just found her very engaging. So I thought, well, because I was having trouble getting people to talk to me in Morgantown, and I was also myself not able to go on camera and talk about Paul because I was suffering too much, and it would have been, too hard for me to talk about my personal story. So I decided to use Bree as the front person to explain to the world what was happening. So that's what brought me to Petersburg.
And when you got there and when you met Bree and learned her story, how then was the network sort of built? I mean, there's a lot of voices that are given presence in this documentary, people with various experiences in this epidemic. Was Bree the instrument in sort of connecting into that community, or were there other people that connected you to those sources?
No, actually, Bree, yes. Through Bree, I learned everything about the town. I mean, she introduced me to her friends, and it was a process of discovery for me. I was investigating myself, and as I said, I'm from Ireland, but I was living in New York at the time. And I didn't really know what was going on in West Virginia and in the small communities. I was learning, and I was desperately trying to get answers. So when Bree told me about, introduced me to her friends, and they told me about their stories, and gradually I started to get deeper and deeper into, what was happening. And she told me about the drugstore, and then about the doctor, and some other key players in the community who were involved in everything that was happening, and just how it all just went down, basically. So it was really through Bree that I got to meet all the players in that part of West Virginia.
And coming into this devastation, obviously with a deeply personal connection to it, were you familiar with this problem in any way before your sort of own family experience?
Um, I had been down to West Virginia, and I loved it down there, and went to the mountains and stayed in a cabin, and just thought it was this beautiful pastoral, beautiful place. And then I had read those stories, hillbilly heroin, or that's what they call it, and which I think is so offensive. And this is the kind of story that gets to people. Those are the headlines that reach. That's the clickbait, like hillbilly heroin or something like that. And I'm trying to, remember exactly how much I knew, but it was very little. I mean, I have to be honest, it was very little. I had no idea to the extent of which it was a problem. The amount of pills that were going through these small communities, and nothing prepared me for that. And also, this was the beginning of the fentanyl epidemic. So, uh, I was researching that as it went, but I don't think that, I knew what fentanyl was because, we knew, our family knew that Paulie was struggling. You know, we knew that he was struggling with pills, and it was, they were rife on campus at that time. And, my sister was, who lived in Ireland, was constantly going back and forth to West Virginia to help Paulie. And, we even got him a Suboxone doctor at one point, so, but I never thought it would ever be fatal. Like, you just don't think that something like, you know, oh, it's a prescription, it's a drug from the doctor, you never think that that's going to end up with a fatality. I was shocked that could end up as a fatality, that somebody would, an addiction like that to pain pills would end up so fatal, and that it is so fatal still, so I don't think I knew that much. I try and look back and try and remember how much I knew. That I obviously didn't know anything, honestly, about the extent of the epidemic until it came to my own door knocking, and until I started asking questions and started digging, because it just hadn't reached people's ears. It wasn't on the cover of the newspaper. It should have been. I should have known. Maybe Paul would be with us today if I had known. Um, so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure that beyond the national headlines that we've all seen pop up at moments throughout the past several years, obviously, it unfortunately in some cases takes a tragedy to really tune us into the full depth of what is going on. We at the Byrd Center have screened a few documentaries in the past couple years that are exploring this issue, and I'm curious to know, did you, in preparing for the production of Overdose, view any other documentaries or works, investigative works that had been done in this, and if so, was there something that you thought was missing that you wanted to bring out in this piece?
That's a great question, Jody. There are some great films out there about this epidemic. And honestly, I hadn't watched. I mean, I've done some films before, and I've been involved in television and on my own work. But no, I really didn't watch anything. I mean, I I was very sensitive to watching things that talked about this. It's funny, like I was on my own journey of throwing myself into the deep end with investigating and meeting people, and seeing the suffering, so I was actually opening myself up to suffering, but for some reason I couldn't watch things that, especially things that had like lots of sirens or people on gurneys, or any footage of somebody with a needle or with pills, or anybody that was under the influence. It really troubled me to see them, and because of my own grief and suffering, it just triggered me, and it just I would just start crying, and I couldn't handle it. So for that reason, I haven't seen the amazing um, film Heroine, which I've heard is incredible. And Jan Rader's work, I'm familiar with her work, and I'm so glad that they did that. And there's so many great films out there, but I still have to bring myself. I think now I'm in a better place. So much time has passed that I can't sit down. But now I'll probably sit down and watch them with a different angle and be like, oh, that's so great. I should have done that. But while I was making Overdose, no, I didn't really, it was too hurtful for me to watch things. I did read everything though.
Mm-hmm. Um, so I'm going to ask one more question in this segment, and then invite our folks from GRaCE to talk a little bit about their use of the film. But I'm curious to know, as the film's been out now, and as it's been screened, what has been some of the reaction that you've experienced, and um, how have you seen the film being used in communities where it is being viewed and discussed?
Yeah, I mean, it really, how it's you get a different reception in different geographical locations. Like I think when I showed it in Ireland, people were just, they couldn't believe it. They're like, that's not real. That didn't happen. Or, that couldn't possibly, really, they were just completely shocked because this is just, the people in Europe, I think a lot of people in Europe just can't believe that this went down and this is still happening like that. This amount of corruption can take place. So it was very interesting to show it to communities there. Here also in New York, when I first started showing portions of the film, and people were also just not aware. I know in West Virginia, which maybe a lot of you are based now or in the surrounding areas, are much more familiar with this and have seen these other films that have come out, and know, you're a harder audience because everything that's happening. I don't have to explain it to you, but so it really depends on where you show it. But the reaction, yeah, so as I said, in Europe, it's been shocking for people. They were horrified, and that this could happen. I think people are also just, they always say it's so real. I'm not sure what, exactly. I think that's a compliment. It is real. I wanted to keep it, the production values are low, like it's not glossy, it's not shiny. I didn't have a crew. I did this whole thing by myself. I put a little camera on somebody's lapel and shot it all myself with a small camera. And I was a one-man crew, so I didn't have any money. I funded it myself. Like I just went on the road, and I'm a single mother. My daughter was 3 at the time when I started this, so she was with me everywhere. It was just like we were on a mission we had to get to the bottom of this. I felt like I was just guided to tell this story. I don't know why. I needed to know. Like I needed to know what the hell was happening. So it was very low production values, so people say it's very real. But I also like that because I think that because I was one man band and I was a mother filmmaker with my daughter in the back of the car, people opened up to me, I think, because of that. They were not threatened. It wasn't like a studio interview with like cameras and lights, and there was nobody like under pressure to answer any question. It was all just like, we're in this together. What do you think about this? What do I think about this? Like, so I think being that low of a production quality and being just a single filmmaker like that, it helped people open up to me and tell their stories. It also made me a little bit vulnerable, at times where I felt like, yeah, people were angry sometimes that I was talking about this. Like if you watch the film, there's a guy shooting, like, what are you doing? You're making us look bad. This is not what's happening here. And that was shocking to me to see that kind of reaction. But I understand that when I started this film, that people were reluctant to talk about what was happening in their community for multiple reasons. Like, West Virginia is an incredible place that has been served, this terrible injustice, but you don't want to portray it like hillbilly heroin. It's so, it's so awful to use that term. And I was very conscious to not show that, on camera. And I was also very, very conscious that I never wanted to film anybody under the influence of any kind of drug or alcohol, because I find that abusive. I just, even if somebody consents to being filmed while they are high, like they're not in their right mind, and I find like that's taking advantage of somebody. So I definitely didn't want to ever show that side of things. I wanted it to just be a very, respectful of the people talking about this very sensitive issue. I hope that answers your question, Jody.
Yeah, no, it does, and I thank you for sharing so much of what it does come through in the film. And I think because of the way that you mention, the what you called low production value, but I think it really does hit home with the story. It makes it so much more impactful, and it doesn't seem surface level because of that. It really does seem like you're digging into the heart of the issue. So absolutely. I've been getting some great questions in the chat box, and I will get those queued up to be able to share them with you. But before I do that, I want to invite Marti Steiner, who has been on our planning committee and been very integral in putting this program together. She is with GRaCE, the community we mentioned earlier, and I want to invite her just to briefly discuss what GRaCE is, what they're doing, and how Overdosed has been a part of their program.
Sure. Thank you very much. So GRaCE is an acronym for Greater Recovery and Community Empowerment. And primarily we train recovery and life coaches. We have both the Recovery Life Coach 1 class and we have the Recovery Coach Professional class. We do this in partnership with higher education, both Shepherd, also Blue Ridge and Eastern Community and Technical Colleges. So when people take that first class, they do receive 3 college credits. They receive a recovery coach certificate and a life coach certificate. So you don't have to be in recovery yourself to be a recovery coach. What coaches do is we listen, we empower, we believe, and we advocate. Once you've taken our first class, you're given the opportunity to volunteer as a coach. We have a platform where anyone in the United States, or I guess the world, but anyone can request a recovery or a life coach online. And our goal is to connect coaches within 24 hours to somebody requesting one. Currently, we have about 1,200 volunteers with our organization. And then once you've completed the first class, if you're interested, we do offer a Recovery Coach Professional class as well. And this is where Mary Sue's film actually is important because we use it as part of our ethics training. Because we do talk about, how is it that her film illustrates how people and communities have become so impacted by addiction. Because the reality of it is everybody in West Virginia is impacted by addiction. And some communities, quite honestly, are decimated by this, particularly in southern West Virginia and other small communities. And so when we have folks come to our training and they watch the movie, it's educational and it really just shares the story of a community and people within that community and how addiction, within the last 20 years has had such an impact in West Virginia. So I really do appreciate the fact that you've made this film because it tells the story from several different perspectives. And it makes for a great ethical discussion in that professionalism class.
Thank you so much, Marti, and for describing that work that's going on. And it's really, obviously such an evocative introduction, I think, for a lot of us into just how devastating this epidemic has been for communities across the state. So I'm going to start sharing a few of the questions that have been coming into the chat box, and please do, if you have questions, enter them in the chat box, and I will get them to Mary Sue. The first one that I want to bring up here is a question that says, and you addressed this a little bit, Mary Sue, but I'm wondering, did you get any direct or organized kind of pushback from the release of this documentary, or as it's been viewed in different communities? And I think there's some questions about how those in the perhaps in the pharmaceutical or in the doctors sort of network that are involved in this epidemic, if there's been responses from them to the documentary.
I'm not actually 100% sure how Dr. McPhee feels about the film. and whether I think that maybe he wasn't too happy. It was never my intention to, it wasn't really about nailing anybody to the cross. It was just on uncovering the story of what happened in that particular town. But I know that, there were people who weren't really ready for that story to be told, or for that, to come out. I didn't, no one ever called me directly to threaten me or anything like that, so, for which I'm grateful for that. And I did not hear from, McKesson or anybody. So, I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, though. I mean, I think that behind the scenes, probably there was some people who thought that I was targeting the doctor in an unkind way, which was never my intention. The story is just a story, really. And I was just trying to demonstrate, how it unfolded in Petersburg is how it had unfolded in many communities across the United States. And sadly, this epidemic did, in a lot of cases, lead back to doctors' offices, but there's so many participating players. There's doctors, there's chemists, and then when you go to the very top, it's the worst of all. You have big pharmaceutical companies and drug manufacturers and distributors who look the other way, who have, to a certain extent, enabled doctors and pharmacies to, enable them to behave that way. So it goes right to the top. And if you really want to, hold people responsible, you have to go right to the top. And I mean, a line that we use in the film is like, how unjust it is, like, how different the justice system is for those at the top and from those at the bottom who are just, dealing on the street, people like Bree, and it's just, as you go higher up, you see that, to the very top, there's absolutely, no repercussions whatsoever for how they behave, or they get a slap on the wrist and they go their way. Whereas somebody like Bree, spent 4 years in federal prison, and Dr. Massey also spent almost 4 years in federal prison. And so I got a bit of pushback from that community. And indirectly, it didn't come straight to my door, but I could feel resistance. My main character, Bree, now she really suffered, and some of the other girls in the film also. And I felt so bad about this because it was their face, it was Bree that was out there, it was Jenny, it was Cammie, and these girls that had put their face on the camera, and they were the ones who were getting the feedback from the community. And I just felt really, really terrible for them, because that was something I never expected. When I started this, I never expected that they would get grief, for being part of this story. Now I think that so much time has gone by, much less so. Like, I think that, the community understands it was necessary to tell this story. I hope they understand that, or it was necessary to talk about this, and that it's not, if you're flooded with pills and your town is flooded with pills by McKesson, and it's because of Purdue and the other drug manufacturers, and they're all making money off of this vulnerable communities, it's not your fault. It's not the community's fault, And, I think that initially when I started, documenting this, there was a sense of like, I'm ashamed from, I'm taking pills, or my family is, or I was selling, I sold my script last month. There was a sense of shame that they were doing something wrong. And it really, it wasn't their fault. It goes much further than that. So yeah, I'm sorry for the girls that had to take slack for me telling the story. That does trouble me.
Well, there's been quite a few questions about Bree and the other subjects that you've interviewed, and sort of basically, have you kept in contact with them, and how are they doing? And you've mentioned a little bit about this, but there's a lot of people asking, how are they doing? And
Well, Bree is doing great. Like, she's amazing. She's doing really well. Like, she had to have had so much that she went through in life. She's doing really, really well. So I'm so happy to hear that. Jenny, some of the other girls in the film relapsed and were like dealing again or using again. And which is really, really sad to see. I think it's really hard to get out of when you're in a community like that and it's in front of you every day and you're trying to do the right thing. But you have a weak moment and it's right there. I understand why people can slide back in and um, you know, both Jenny and Cami have had trouble, recently. And, I hope they're really, really strong, amazing women. And I really hope they find a way out of this. I think about it all the time. And, I just really rooting for them. They need support. But, some of the other people in the film, they I'm still in touch with everybody. I hope that we can always be in solidarity and together on the same side. I haven't spoken to the doctor, since my last interview with him. I did call him at one point and I didn't, receive a return call, understandably. So yeah.
So in sort of keeping up with that, have they shared sort of any positive sort of movement or local sort of perhaps unifying around the issue, that because they were brave enough to sort of speak out and share this story? Or I know we see at the end of the film with Bree leaving because of the pressures that she was facing. How has that dynamic played out since the release of the documentary?
Yeah, so Bree did leave. She went to Atlanta and she was there for almost a year. She's back in West Virginia now, and she does work in her way, helping people, coaching people in the circle that she can. She works a lot with women that were incarcerated, and she feels, strongly about a lot of issues related to addiction and children that have grown up in an environment like she did. Cami was really, really great in the beginning to help us get the movie out there. And she was doing a lot of work also getting people into recovery. And but then I don't know if it was through the process of her helping people that she relapsed herself and fell back in. But, she really tried to bring the community together. Kevin, who now lives in Huntington, is amazing. Like, I see him. He has a son now, and he's such an incredible individual and has turned his life around and is such a positive beacon of hope for anybody who thinks that they can't, turn things around. You just look at Kevin and you can. Like, his story is just amazing. So, I mean, yeah, so I think everybody that has been part of the film, has tried and understands the process. And, like everybody in recovery, you try to give back as much as you can. Now, we haven't really unified as a group. I mean, that would be really cool if it was like, we could all get together and, address everything. I am still, there are still some people probably in the community that, might not be ready for the film, or might have problems with what I talk about in the film, so yeah, I mean, I really want to go back down to Petersburg and be able to show it more freely, and talk about it. I'm not afraid to answer any of the questions. So hopefully that'll happen soon.
There was a question regarding the status of settlement money in cases, and is it being managed, or is that still something that's kind of yet to come? Or
yeah, I mean, there was some of the settle money was kind of trickling back in. I think you had to. It was grant. There were grants that became available, and you could apply for them. And it was. I mean, there's definitely a lot more recovery opportunities available now. There was really nothing, when I started this. It was like, as Jenny says in the film, it's like you go to jail or you die. I mean, that's where Jenny detoxed, and Bree, and it was through jail that they got out. Believe it or not, it's crazy that it would have to come to that. But I know, also with the work that Marti is doing, and there's so much more available for people down there now. Thank God. I think that's really making a difference.
And there's a kind of a follow-up question. Has the film do you know, has the film made any impact among policymakers? Are there any sort of movements in the policy arena in response to this that perhaps are taking a different approach than has been tried before?
God, you know, I'm not sure. You know, I know that the DEA use it when for their training, and they've shown it around a lot in West Virginia and across the country. And I know that some, you know, politicians have watched it and are aware of it, and maybe, you know, saw, you know, got a glimpse into the side, this real story, the people on the ground, you know. But I'm not sure how influential it has been. You know, I don't know. I would love to to think that it has made a difference. You know, I mean, I try every day, you know, to try and push it out there and get the word out. You know, it would be brilliant to know that it made an impact in some way. Hopefully that will happen if it hasn't already.
And we did have a few questions from people regarding how they can view the film if they didn't get a chance to view it in the past 24-hour window that we were able to make available. Is it available through any current streaming sources or soon to be?
Yeah, I think soon, soon to be, Jody. Yeah, I have a distributor, but I can't announce it yet. I'm not allowed to talk
Sure.
about it yet. But hopefully, when that's a done deal and you know everything, it'll be available to stream. You know, I mean, I have to wait to get the go ahead to show it, to give a link to people. But if anybody wants to show it in their community, or you know, please get in touch with me, and we can organize something, because I think that for the general public, I'll have to wait for the go ahead to get that. But if we want to do some community organizing or show within your community, or if you think that it can help anybody, get in touch with me, and we'll be able to show it somehow and get it to people that need to see it.
Excellent. And so I will then add to that whenever that news can be available and we can make that announcement, we'll certainly share that with the group that are here tonight that signed up for the film, just to make sure that everybody has a chance to really see this. You know, this piece, and to really understand the context behind the conversation tonight. So let me see here. There was another question that just popped in. There's a person who is sharing that they are working in the recovery field. It has been, and the documentary was very eye-opening to watch, that they are working for WVU in the research study in the northern Panhandle to better service caregivers and babies exposed to substances. So there's one in the field shared experience there. And there have been several people too in the chat tonight that have recognized the film and GRaCE's work in recovery coaching, and how impactful the film has been in that process for people engaging with this really meaningful work. So obviously the film has, you know, made a significant impact here in our own Eastern Panhandle community. And thank you so much for the work that went into it to make that possible. We do still have a few minutes for any questions. If you have them, please enter them in the chat box now. And I will, in the meantime, ask, have you considered, is there another chapter of Overdosed? Is there something that might be a storyline that you want to pick up with this, you know, in the future, or even just on the subject, a different angle of it that you would like to explore coming out of doing this film?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it would be so amazing to do a follow-up, to go back to the community now and see how things have changed. I think that we could all learn a lot from what's happened in the last 4 years since I began Overdosed, and to catch up with all the the characters in the film, and to see where they are now. I mean, I would love to do that, you know, so hopefully, you know, when the pandemic ends, you know, I can get back down there and catch up with people, and whether it's a film or just like little videos about where we are now. I just think it would be helpful for people to see, that have gotten to know some of the characters through Overdosed. Yeah, there's still so much work to be done, I feel, I mean, as we all know, the pandemic has not helped with people suffering from addiction. It's created a lot of isolation for people. And now is when we really need resources, and people are reaching out, and we need to be there to help them through this difficult time. And it's frustrating not being able to actually go on the ground and give somebody that hug and help tell them that they can and they do matter, and we do see them. I think we do what we can now in the virtual world until, we can get back. But I would love to be back on the ground in West Virginia doing more, face to face with people, more filming, definitely.
So I think we had a question for Marti specific to GRaCE. And that question was, is there a year requirement for becoming a coach? Is there a space of time, for people to essentially be studying or learning about the process before they are sort of able to go out and be in the field working?
No, there isn't. Originally, when we first started, we did have a year requirement if somebody was in recovery themselves, but we actually got rid of that requirement because as people take the class, they do learn about recovery. People learn about themselves, whether or not they're in recovery, and if they're willing to walk with someone as they improve. We always say that coaching is a total servitude. It's all about that coachee. What are their goals, and how do we help empower them to find those resources they need? But the coach themselves, we actually grow as people too, as we walk with people and we watch them become successful in attaining those goals. So there isn't a requirement as far as if you are in recovery yourself. Anyone who's willing to walk with someone is eligible.
So there is a question regarding recovery with medical treatment recovery from addiction. I think the question is sort of referring to, how was that prevalent in the people that you interviewed, Mary Sue, where did they have experiences with medically assisted recovery, or and did they share that experience with you?
That's a great question. Thank you. There was a little bit of background information with my nephew. He was seeing a Suboxone doctor, and a friend of his also. Well, a lot of people were, but this one doctor was. It wasn't very good because this doctor was actually taking cash payments and ended up being investigated, I think, by the state. So that's why I was reluctant to talk about MAT in the film, because it really does help a lot of people. Now it didn't help in my case and in some other friends that I know, but then maybe they weren't ready for, or weren't fully committed to doing the program. I know it can be extraordinarily helpful. I do know some people that were getting on MAT treatments in the area, and it was frustrating for them at the time because they did have to drive quite far. When you're in a rural community at that time, the young man had to drive from Petersburg to Martinsburg twice a week, and he didn't have a driver's license, so you then, you're ending up having, you have to get a ride up there and back, and then you can't work because you have to go twice a week. And it was very difficult for him at the time to stay with that program. And now I think it's tremendous. It's much easier. I do believe, I'm sure Marti knows a lot more than me about this, about how much more it is accessible it is for people in rural communities like that. With Jenny, and some of the other girls, they did not do MAT treatment. Kevin did the 12-step program. But yeah, I mean, the access to Suboxone is something that is very important for people in the community, and if it's readily available. I just noted that it does have become it's a street drug as well, so there's a bit of controversy around its usage. So, but maybe Marty can explain more about that.
Well, definitely as coaches, we recognize that it's really up to the coachee. Whatever they feel is their pathway to recovery, if they're suffering addiction, we are totally supportive of that. So, and we try to help them find those resources, whatever those are. We empower them to find them. So.
Thank you. There's been several questions, so it's good to address that in the conversation. So I will do one last call for any questions from the audience in the chat box. And I did see one question regarding would Mary Sue, would you consider doing a second part or perhaps a view in Martinsburg with some of the subjects in the film, and as you mentioned, there's already a tie-in, with some of their recovery programs coming into the Eastern Panhandle.
Oh yeah, I would love to know what's going on. I'd love to get back down there and meet people and do a follow-up and I'm really passionate about this topic, and I'm also passionate about West Virginia. I love it. I love the people there. It spoke to me, and I just feel like West Virginia needs justice for what happened, and it needs recognition, and an apology, because it's complex, and it's a complex issue, but West Virginians really need to know that they matter and that they count, and that this what's befallen them is just not just. So if there's anything I can do to help get attention to the community, to the recovery community, to help people who are suffering with addiction, or to help get the word out, I'll do it. I'm down there. If anybody would like me to participate in any part of the recovery movement in West Virginia, please get in touch. I'd love to get back down there and do some more work.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much for the time this evening, for addressing all of the questions that have come in, and for bringing this incredibly powerful film to us to help us understand what is going on in our state, and in parts of our state that are much closer than we perhaps often think. This, as I mentioned earlier, this is an issue that sometimes we think about it being pretty far away from us in the state, but it is very much impacting our own community here. So it's really important that this documentary brings to light that issue. And of course, there have been many expressions in the chat box of sympathy to you and your family for the loss of your nephew. Of course, knowing that being the impetus behind the documentary. So I do want to convey that to you, Mary Sue. So with that, unless I see any last minute questions pop in, I would like to again thank Mary Sue Connolly, producer director of Overdosed. And I also want to thank Marti Steiner from GRaCE, Effie Callis, Marian Alexander, John Unger, our planning committee, and most especially want to thank West Virginia University Medicine for, again, sponsoring tonight's program. Mary Sue, there was a last minute question popped in, but it's a good one to close out the evening on. What would you, is there a way for people to get in touch with you, perhaps with any questions they didn't get to ask tonight, or to learn more about how they can perhaps get involved with this epidemic and the response to it going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Jody and Marty, and for everybody that's hosting this event. Thanks again. It's so great. And yes, please, you can reach me. My email is info@overdosedfilms.com. We also have a Facebook page called We Are Overdosed, so you can follow along there and, get in touch with any questions you have. Like, I love talking about this. I'm passionate about this topic, as I said, and yeah, and I'm delighted to meet people local, who are just so directly impacted by it and familiar with it, and if we can all work together, we can maybe make some change happen. So yeah, definitely get in touch, and thank you for being here tonight, and for this story. It's personal, as it came to affect me and my own family so directly, and it's a long journey that I've been on, and it was very difficult for me to talk about these things initially, and to get to to be able to even go on camera and talk about my nephew, and his story and about what happened. And so it's great to be able to engage with people who understand, and to have a platform to talk about overdose, and to talk about West Virginia and anyone who's been impacted by addiction. We're not alone. And I think in solidarity, like together, we can really shake things up. And I know a lot of things, amazing work has been done by Marti and other people in West Virginia, like CC Brown in Charleston. I've seen these amazing people just from their love. It was love that has driven this whole environment, this recovery environment, and and solidarity. And I do think that together we can make a difference, and that's what I'm committed to doing. So thank you. Get in touch. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. I am putting into the chat box the link to overdosedfilm.com, where you can find more information about the film, and how to reach out to Mary Sue if you want to get in touch. And with that, thank you again, Mary Sue, for a really amazing conversation tonight. Thank you all so much for your questions. And with that, I will say good evening and thank you.